You've probably heard this melody 100 times, in kids' movies, commercials, maybe even your ringtone, and never once heard the name of the man who created it. The song is Mbube. You might know it as The Lion Sleeps Tonight. The man behind it is Solomon Linda, and his hidden legacy says a lot about music, money, and justice. Before we get into it, hit subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who can hum the song but doesn't know who wrote it. By the end of this video, every time you hear that tune, you'll hear his name too. A voice from the hostels. We start in KwaZulu Natal, South Africa, early 1900s. Solomon Popoli Linda is born around 1909 near Pomeroy, in what was then Natal. He grows up in a Zulu community steeped in amahubo and izingoma zomshado, traditional praise and wedding songs, and learns hymns and choral singing at Gordon Memorial Mission School. That mix of African vocal traditions and Western church harmonies will shape everything he creates. As a young man, he joins the tide of black migrant laborers heading to Johannesburg, the booming industrial city built on gold mines. He works tough, low-paid jobs by day and sings by night, performing in beer halls and hostels with vocal groups that blend Zulu call and response with tight harmonies. In the late 1930s, he leads a group called the Evening Birds, an a cappella ensemble that competes in choirs and performs in the city. Their sound, rich bass, soaring high lines, interlocking parts, is part of a growing style that will later influence isicathamiya, the genre made famous by groups like Ladysmith Black Mambazo. Now picture this. It's 1939. In a Johannesburg studio owned by Italian immigrant Eric Gallo, Solomon and the Evening Birds step up to a single microphone. They have little rehearsal time, and they're about to improvise a song that will travel further than any of them can imagine. Mbube. The Lion Roars. In that studio, Solomon Linda begins to improvise a song built around a powerful cyclical chant, Mbube, the Zulu word for lion. His group supports him with layered harmonies, a strong bass foundation, and a piercing falsetto line that cuts through the texture. The track is raw, urgent, and unlike anything the studio has recorded before, fusing traditional Zulu elements with Western-influenced harmonies and the energy of the city. Gallo's label records Mbube in a handful of takes and releases it on 10-inch 78 RPM discs. In South Africa, Mbube becomes a massive hit, reportedly selling over 100,000 copies over the next decade, huge numbers for the time and place. The song is so influential that the name Mbube becomes associated with a whole style of powerful male choral singing. But while Mbube makes Solomon Linda a local star, it does not make him wealthy. Shortly after the recording session, he signs away his rights to the song to Eric Gallo's company for 10 shillings, less than $1 in today's money. He cannot read English well and has no real understanding of royalties or global copyright. A later court would call the deal unfair, but at the time, it's just one more way the colonial music industry extracts value from black creativity. Question for you. How many songs that shaped your childhood do you think were written by people who never saw more than a few dollars from them? From Mbube to Wimoweh to The Lion Sleeps Tonight, Mbube doesn't stay in South Africa. Copies of the record make their way to Europe and then to the United States. In the 1940s and 50s, American folk enthusiasts begin hunting for authentic African music, and one of them, Alan Lomax, shares the track with folk singer Pete Seeger. Seeger mishears the Zulu words and reworks the song for his group, the Weavers, under the title Wimoweh, their attempt at Solomon's improvised falsetto line. In 1952, the Weavers record Wimoweh, turning Mbube into a U.S. folk hit. The arrangement keeps Linda's core vocal idea, but frames it with a new structure and English-language marketing. A decade later, in 1961, the American doo-wop group The Tokens record yet another version, now titled The Lion Sleeps Tonight. Songwriters George David Weiss, Hugo Peretti, and Luigi Creatore add a new English melody. In the jungle, the mighty jungle, the lion sleeps tonight, and credit themselves alongside publisher credit lines that barely mention the original African source. That version becomes a global hit, topping the Billboard charts and embedding itself in pop culture. Over the years, it appears in covers, cartoons, and eventually in massive franchises like The Lion King, generating millions of dollars in royalties. Through all of this, Solomon Linda receives almost nothing. He continues working as a laborer and singer in South Africa, and when he dies in 1962, he reportedly has less than $25 in his bank account. His family lives in poverty in Soweto, even as his musical DNA circles the world. So the question becomes, how does a Zulu migrant worker's improvisation become a global anthem without his name attached to the success? The legal battle, when the lion fights back. For decades, the story of Mbube remains obscure outside certain circles. But in the late 1990s and early 2000s, journalists and lawyers begin to shine a spotlight on Solomon Linda's role and the lack of compensation for his heirs. A pivotal moment comes when South African journalist Ryan Malan publishes an investigation laying out the history, how Linda created Mbube, how rights were signed away for a tiny sum, and how Western companies, including those connected to major entertainment brands, earned millions from versions of the song. In 2004, Linda's surviving daughters file a lawsuit in South Africa against a major music publisher linked to the song's global rights, connected to revenues from uses including Disney's The Lion King. They seek back royalties and recognition of their claim, arguing that their father's copyright was exploited under unfair conditions and that his heirs deserve to share in the profit. Defendants initially argue that Linda's rights were legitimately assigned decades earlier, sometimes pointing to signatures from his widow, who was illiterate, on documents she didn't fully understand. But public opinion and legal arguments about fairness and colonial power imbalances put pressure on the companies involved. In 2006, just before the case goes to trial, the parties reach a settlement. The terms are confidential, but reports suggest the agreement includes payment for past uses of The Lion Sleeps Tonight and a share of future royalties for Linda's heirs worldwide. Sources later estimate that Linda's daughters each received around $250,000 over the following decade, and that the family earned tens of thousands of dollars per year under the settlement. The case is about more than one song. A court recognizes that Linda probably sold his rights under unfair circumstances, and the settlement is seen as an example of how heirs in former British colonies can seek compensation when their ancestors' works were exploited under earlier law. Question: do you think a settlement decades later can ever fully fix the gap between a man dying with $25 to his name and a song generating millions around the world? The hidden legacy in the music itself. It's easy to tell this story as a legal drama about copyright, but Solomon Linda's legacy is also musical and cultural. Mbube helped shape a whole style of South African choral music. Its powerful harmonies and structure influenced isicathamiya, later popularized internationally by groups such as Ladysmith Black Mambazo. The idea that a group of men could stand in a circle, blend traditional Zulu motifs with Western harmonies, and create something new became a template for many ensembles that followed. The song's journey, from a 1939 studio in Johannesburg to American folk stages, to pop charts, to global cinema, shows how Black creativity often travels. Born in local struggle and joy, filtered through foreign industries, repackaged and sometimes stripped of its roots. Yet the sound itself carries traces of its origin. Even in The Lion Sleeps Tonight, you can still hear the echo of Linda's falsetto line, the cycling chant, the layered textures that came out of migrant hostels and mission school choirs. This is part of the hidden legacy, the way African musical ideas have quietly shaped global pop, even when the original creators were unpaid, unnamed, or both. In 2026, when Afro beats, Amapiano, and other African genres dominate streaming charts and TikTok dances, Linda's story feels especially relevant. It reminds us to ask, who's getting paid and whose names are being left off the credits? Remembering Solomon Linda in 2026. Solomon Linda died in 1962, reportedly from kidney disease, and was buried in an unmarked grave after a life spent mostly in poverty. He did not live to see his song conquer the world, or to watch his grandchildren grow up with the security his royalties could have provided. But his legacy is no longer invisible. Biographies, documentaries, and articles now credit him as the original composer of Mbube, the seed from which Wimoweh and The Lion Sleeps Tonight grew. Legal scholars cite his family's settlement as an important example of how heirs can challenge unfair contracts rooted in colonial power imbalances. South African media and cultural institutions celebrate him as a foundational figure in the country's musical history. Most importantly, when people tell the story of The Lion Sleeps Tonight today, more and more of them start with his name. Not as a footnote, but as the starting point. In 2026, his story asks us to think differently about the songs, memes, and sounds we share every day. When a clip goes viral, when a sample anchors a hit, when a melody feels like it's always been there, there is almost always a person, often a black person, at the beginning of that chain. The hidden legacy of Solomon Linda is not just that his family eventually got a settlement, it's that his voice, recorded in a single take in a Johannesburg studio, refused to stay buried. It roared quietly through vinyl, through radio, through cinema, until the world finally turned around and asked, wait, who sang that first? If this story changed the way you hear The Lion Sleeps Tonight, do 3 things right now. Comment, remember Solomon Linda if you made it to the end, and tell me, when was the first time you remember hearing that melody? Share this video with someone who loves that song but has never heard the name behind it. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes about the black creators whose work shaped global culture long before anyone gave them credit. The next time you hear that soaring melody, don't just hum along. Say his name, Solomon Linda. Please support the channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing this video so more people can discover and learn this hidden history.